I'm Gary Nickerson.
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
And this is Outside My Window. Todd Lacey lives in Yarmouth. He's a physiotherapist at Southwest Physiotherapy. He's also a scout leader for a local scout troop. But earlier this year, Todd attempted to climb Mount Aconcagua. That's in Argentina. It's the highest mountain outside of Nepal and the highest in the Western Hemisphere. It has a summit elevation of over 6,960 meters. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here.
Did you just wake up one morning and decide, I think I'm going to try to climb this mountain?
No. I had some motivation through a good friend of mine. I wouldn't consider myself necessarily a mountaineer, or I really didn't have any experience. But it was something that a very good friend of mine approached, someone who I met in high school, and someone who who's been kind of a motivator, throughout my life, and I thought this would be a great thing to latch onto and do together. Yeah.
With friends like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it's the opportunity to spend time with a buddy to do something exceptional. Really, that's what motivated me.
Had you climbed anything else before that?
So no, actually, I hadn't.
Well, that's ambitious, isn't it?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. A lot of people ask me, like, so what mountains have you done before, and what experience have you had? And the answer is really none. I mean, I've done plenty of backwoods camping and things like that, but nothing as extreme as going to another country and climbing a mountain for 3 weeks, right? So.
One of the first things that kind of came to my mind when I thought about this is that, when you're dealing with the higher altitudes, of course, the air is thinner. But if you've never done this before, how do you train for something like that?
That's a great question. And there's, for the altitude specifically, especially for the lower oxygen, I mean, we're in the most oxygen-rich altitude, of course, in the world, being at sea level. So here our oxygen content is about 20% or so. And on the peak of the mountain, it's roughly about 8.5%. So it's significant, and there's nothing you can really do to train at sea level for that, other than be in as good condition as you can be. So I focus most of my training on just my muscular endurance, and by picking the largest areas in Yarmouth to climb. which isn't a lot. I mean, really, that's
you're kind of limited there.
Yeah. There's like the Arcadia School Trail Drumlin, which is just a little hill. So I would go out there in the evenings and after work, and I'd put on a backpack, and I'd climb up and down that for anywhere between 1 and 3 hours, and just go. And then if the weather was a little bit iffy, I would. They got to know me pretty good at the Grand Hotel, because they've got a stairwell there that's, I would just climb the stairwell just over and over and over. So I remember I went to work one day, and I was talking with someone. They said, oh, the CN Tower is like 135 stories. I said, oh, geez, okay, I'll have to do that next time I go. So I did. I climbed that and worked away at that until it got not too bad. And then I thought to myself, I got to go a lot higher than that. So I got to the point where I do about 300 floors at a time. So that's how I conditioned my legs. But in terms of the altitude and your lungs, there's not a lot you can do other than just kind of go slow and hope for the best, really.
When people think mountain climbing, the word climbing, of course, comes as part of it, but it is a lot of hiking, isn't it?
Oh, they consider this mountain, Aconcagua, a non-technical climb, meaning that you don't have to be roped in, so you're not using like carabiners and things like this. It's I would say a trekking and hiking climb, but even at that, that's kind of doesn't describe it super well, because it's some of the terrain and the substrate is really kind of technical. Like, the mountain moves a lot underneath your feet. There's a lot of scree that you're climbing up and things like this, loose gravel and whatnot. So it's kind of like, if you can imagine going, for every 2 steps you go up in places, you fall back 1, basically.
Wow.
So it's
That's arduous.
It's arduous, yeah, and the days are long, yeah.
Does it require local guides, or are you required to bring along somebody to kind of bring you through it?
You're not required to. It's highly advised. When you enter the park, if you're going without a guide, you have to have a very detailed plan laid out, and your plan can be accepted or denied based on how complete it is. But when you have a guide, that's taken care of, and guides are very important because their role is to keep you safe, basically. So they're watching for signs and cues in your body that you might not recognize. Signs of extreme fatigue, or with the decreased oxygen, sometimes your decision making isn't what it should be. So they keep an eye out for you, and they're looking after you. Yeah.
So they have the ability to say, we're done.
Interestingly, yeah, they can. And if you're smart, you listen to them. But you don't necessarily have to listen to them, but that's at your own peril. Because actually, while we were there were some climbers that continued to climb against the advice of their guides. And, their guides are required to still travel with them, even though it's a poor decision. And in a couple of cases during the time that we were at altitude, a couple of people didn't. They suffered from altitude sickness, and they didn't make it off the mountain. So it's people can do some pretty ridiculous things, and it's a very inhospitable area. So you got to take the advice of your guides.
Yeah, it seems to me that when you're dealing with something that's quote unquote life and death, you don't think of it that way, but it can very easily be.
Yeah. It's there's so many challenges. It's the terrain, the altitude, extreme fatigue. When you're at altitude, your heart rate is already flying along higher than what it normally is here at sea level. So you already have a hit against your kind of endurance and your cardiovascular system. And then when you're pushing it every day to climb higher and go into thinner and thinner air, you end up, it's an extreme situation. So you can't just you can't just come down very quickly. So if you run yourself into an altitude sickness problem, there's only a limited number of ways that you can be helped.
Is it like the reverse bends?
That's a good question. So when you do go high, so what happens is your body reacts to the low oxygen in a lot of different ways. You can get problems with brain swelling called cerebral edema, where you can get fluid in your lungs as a result. And everyone responds a little bit differently. And the only real fix for it is to come back down.
Quickly?
Yeah. Quickly, yeah. So, yeah, you have to be able to recognize and respond, and move fast, yeah.
Do you think that your day job gave you a bit of an advantage in this situation?
Well, that's a good question. I think that I think it did, in so much that I could recognize what my personal limits were and know the severity of the consequences of those issues. So, I guess it sounds like I'm a risk taker because I've gone and climbed this mountain, but truth be told, I'm not a risk taker. So on the balance of things, when things aren't adding up, I pull back, yeah. So I would say probably the biggest way that my work helps me is the fact that I'm not a big risk taker. Yeah.
Your buddy just asked you to spend the week. Let's go climb a mountain.
Yeah. So
well, most people just head to the camp.
Yeah.
We're out on a fishing trip.
Yeah.
You have some interesting buddies.
Yeah. So my the fellow I went with he's chemistry professor out in Alberta, and just a really driven young guy. This is I guess I'm kind of proud of my friend. I mean, he's accomplished a lot. We're the same age, and he was a early tenure professor as university, and so really well accomplished and driven. And I guess it was. I was just kind of glad to have that experience with him, and I'm glad to have been there because he had previously climbed a mountain, Kilimanjaro, 2 years prior, and so he was familiar with altitude and what that felt like and that sort of thing. So when we were climbing, we got to about 6,000 meters as one of our altitude climbs. Then we dropped back down because that's how you climb the mountains. You don't go straight up; you go up, expose yourself to the altitude, come back down, and recover and rest. So we had done that, and when we came back down to 5,500 meters, we were exhausted, so we went to our tents to rest. With Paul, he was always on time for meals and things like this, and when we were having supper, he didn't show up right away, so I went to his tent, and he was having some distress, and there was a guide in there with him, and trying to ask him different types of questions, and he had kind of started to not answer them properly. So when I talked about cerebral edema earlier, that was one of the signs of it. So we had to try to act and try to get him off the mountain. Yeah.
So how did you come to choose this particular mountain?
So this mountain is one of the 7 summits. So each continent has its own highest mountain, and this happens to be the highest peak in the North and South America. So this is kind of one of the bucket lists of mountains to climb.
When you come back down into your base camp area and get assessed and then realize, it looks like we're having some problems and we need to kind of call this off, that's got to be emotionally draining in and of itself, is it?
Yeah, it was pretty, well, in Paul's case, it wasn't, because he wasn't in a state to really consider it that way. And when we had to try to bring him down off the mountain, my guide came to me and said, "Can you help?" Because the circumstances around that, we actually had kind of a snowstorm and the weather was turning bad. So we had to decide, do I abandon the mountain as well to help him come down? So the guide put it to me that way. He said, we need your help, and if you do help, you can't go back up. You can't finish the climb. That's the end of the expedition. So that was an easy decision for me to make, to help him out and get him down. And once we made that decision and started to bring him down, we realized it was we couldn't make it to base camp. So it's not like you go down to base camp and then decide. You have to decide at that point. So we did everything we could to start to bring him down, and fortunately there was a break in the weather, and they managed to phone base camp through using walkie-talkies, basically. So they would send a message to camp, kind of leapfrog the messages down around the mountain. And then they were able to summon a helicopter to come, right? So that's kind of the thing about that is the camps aren't necessarily helicopter friendly. So then you have to hike to an area. In this case, it was higher up the mountain to find a spot where the helicopter could land. So yeah, it's like it has to be taken care of on the mountain. You can't come down. And there's such a limited window of time that you can do this, because you have to do it before dark and all of that. So it was a pretty, I would say pretty thrilling experience, I guess. Pretty scary, actually.
You mentioned the weather. Is there a specific window of opportunity that's optimal for a climb like this?
Yeah, so the mountain really is only open 3 months of the year. Because that is the most hospitable time frame to climb it. So it's early in the year, January, February, that time, December, January, February. And after that, it's just pretty much impossible to climb. But what's kind of interesting is during those 3 months, if you make it to the top as a summit, you're actually the highest. You're actually the highest people on Earth at that point, because the mountains in the Himalayas are all closed at that time. So, yeah, it's really interesting because when you're up that high too, and like it's just such an amazing experience to see mountains below you. You know, it's not something that you think of, like to be looking down at mountains, but there you are, like looking down at all these mountain ranges in the Andes. Yeah.
It must have been quite a visual on the way up as it was it not?
Yeah, well, it really is, because it changes from like desert landscape to kind of glacial. So it goes from it changes that way, and really, a lot of times you're looking at boots of the guy in front of you as you're climbing up, right? Because your guides are really good at pacing you as you're going. So you're just, footfalls, and sometimes you're just thinking foot. So sometimes you're not actually looking around until you stop, because it's just so much work in trying to to do that. But when you stop for your rest and look around, it's really, really amazing.
Technology being what it is, you must have some great GoPro footage and the like.
So I got a lot of good photos of things like the mules coming by in the lower slopes, and a lot of stuff going up to about, I would say, probably about up to about 6,000 meters. But after that, I actually stopped taking photos because it was too cold and kind of hard to do. So a lot of my stuff is of the lower slopes, and but as you go up, you're taking that phone out less and less. It's just technically difficult because you've got your poles and everything too, your climbing poles and your gear, and you're taking these the steps. They take a lot of energy too. So at that point, you don't want to burn extra energy taking photos, because your goal is to try to get to the top.
Now, you're not an overly husky individual, but what was your physical state like after having made it almost to the top? I mean, how much weight did you lose and all that? Like, what kind of state were you in?
Yeah. So I went into it knowing that it'd be kind of difficult. So I was probably about 165 pounds going in. So, and by the time I was finished and come down the mountain, I'd lost. I was about 100. I was under 145 pounds. So wow. I lost over 20 plus pounds on the climb, and that's still eating a lot and still consuming a lot, but you're just burning so much energy going up.
Yeah, what's your caloric intake supposed to be like on something like that?
Yeah,
you got to figure that's way up there.
That's I'm not exactly sure. I would just eat until I couldn't eat anymore, basically. And it's funny because chewing is even difficult. It may sound weird, but when you're chewing, you can't breathe, right? So you chew a little bit, then you take a few breaths, and then you chew a little bit and take a few breaths, and so even eating felt difficult to do, and even if it was the best food you could imagine, you just don't have an appetite. You just feel physically unwell at points. So it could be great food, but you just every bite was a struggle at times.
Forgot to ask you this earlier, Todd, but what was the reaction from family and friends when you said, I'm going to go to Argentina and climb this mountain?
Well, from my wife, who knows Paul, said, oh, yeah, I figured as much, basically. So I got a lot of, it almost felt like a going away, like a farewell party when I left the airport. There were tears, and it felt kind of like they were sending me off to uncertain ends, and I hadn't really thought of it quite that way, but it took a lot of toll on them. I stayed in contact with my wife as much as I could up until we started the mountain, but then once we were on the mountain, there was no contact, except for 2 different base camps, which kind of bookended the trip. So for a lot of the time in the middle of the trip, there was not a lot of contact. Yeah, it was hard to be away from. It was hard to be away from them. It was hard at times, even just to let them know I was safe, even though they they wouldn't have necessarily, known that. I think one of the tricky bits was when my friend was rescued off the mountain via helicopter, that insurance agency sends an automatic email out to his wife, right? So his wife contacted my wife, and the only information they had was Paul's been airlifted off the mountain. Todd's still on the mountain. That's the only information my wife had for a few days until we could get messages to her to let her know that I was still okay. So yeah, that was anyway. If I doing something like that again, I definitely would take a satellite phone with me.
I was going to ask, is she going to let you out of the house again?
Yeah, so it's too early right now to ask her for another big adventure. We've got something planned, but yeah, something like this you don't do every year anyway. Something it feels like this is almost like an Olympic event. Maybe every 4 years, try to do something extraordinary. Do it while you can and while your body can do it. Right.
How is Paul, by the way? We never asked.
Oh, so yeah, so he, I didn't know for how he was for a couple of days, so it was kind of sketchy there because now I was by myself without my partner in there, and all I wanted to know is how he was doing, right? Because they asked me the next day after he was evacuated, what do you want to do? Do you want to go up the mountain or down? Those are your options. And I said, I want to stay right here until I find out if he's okay. And they said, well, you can't. We don't know how he's doing. You can't stay here. I said, well, I've got enough food to stay here. I think I can stay here a little while longer until we get a radio message. And so the next day we got a radio message that everything was fine. So it was okay to continue up the mountain. So he made out okay. And, if I'd gone down the mountain to see if he was okay, and he would have kicked my ass and said, what are you doing, right? So we came all this way. So yeah, knowing how he was doing was important. So I had the benefit of knowing how he was doing about a day later, and he started to recover fairly quickly because it's really weird with altitude. As soon as you go down, that's the cure, right? So when you go down, all of these crazy kind of perceptual and motor things that were happening to him just resolved. So yeah, he did well once he was back down.
So there's no lasting effects to that if you get it quick?
If you get it quick, yeah. This was an amazing rescue because it happened just before nightfall, and they managed to when the helicopter finally took off, it was twilight, and it just dropped down the mountain. It was just him and the pilot in there, and they took him right down out to a local hospital, or I'm sorry, to an ambulance, and then he was assessed there as recovering at that point. So yeah, he's doing well, and I'd say 5 days later he was back to exercising and running and things like that. So wow. Yeah,
I'm curious about the process that you had to go through to actually get to the mountain in your climb. Is there a regulatory process? Did you need approval from the Argentinian government or local governments?
That's a great question. So this is one of the 7 summits, and it's very popular. So so it's actually not too difficult to get there, and guides will help you with the paperwork and getting the permits to climb the mountain and whatnot. So that process isn't too difficult. I'd say the hardest thing is just arranging your flights to get there. For me, we had to go to the way that we did it is I flew from here from Canada to Bolivia. To Colombia, then to Bolivia, Chile, and then Argentina. So you hopscotch around the South America a little bit. But we stopped. In order to kind of get my body ready, there was a whole leg that we did in Bolivia for 5 days because there's a city there called La Paz, which is about 4,000 meters. So when you're asking earlier, how do you prepare for it in terms of the altitude? The way that I chose to do it was to live in Bolivia, go and stay in Bolivia for almost a week to try to get my body ready. So if you're, so in terms of getting there, the logistics of getting there, you really ought to try to step up your altitude gradually instead of flying right from here to start the mountain. So yeah, so I had an opportunity to get some altitude experience.
Did you leave any personal memento behind on the mountain. And did you bring anything back with you? You know, and are you allowed to do that?
Yeah, that's great. I carried two items with me that my family gave me. One was my son's scout neckerchief. So I wore that, and it was actually a pretty handy piece of equipment because it kept the sun off my neck, and yeah, it was just nice to know that that was kind of around me. And my daughter gave me a trinket unicorn that she wanted me to place on the top of the mountain. So I had these two very lightweight items with me. And I also brought with me some badges to give to guides. So, you know, right now in Argentina and Mendoza, there's a couple of guides there with the Yarmouth scouting crests, and hopefully they carry them with some pride too. So that's what I kind of left on the mountain. And on return, well, actually, Mendoza is known for its wine, I would say. So yeah, a couple of bottles of great wine from Mendoza is what I brought back. Some Malbec wine, and yeah, that didn't last though, unfortunately. So that souvenir, maybe I've got the bottle, I don't know, but that's about it.
Was it good?
Yeah, it's terrific. Very, very. Yeah, it was worth the climb, I guess you'd say.
So during the whole process, you know, the training and then obviously the climb, what did you learn about yourself that you didn't know before?
Yeah. So, you know, I learned how important it is to have a friend and keep in contact with your friends like this. You know, people that kind of, I would say, bring a lot out of you. You know. I don't think I'm naturally adventurous, but having a close friendship like that just makes your life a lot richer as a result, and I'm so grateful for it. I would say that the climb itself was, as you said earlier, 6,900 meters, and I didn't make it to the top. I only made it to 6,600 meters. So. There was a point there that I had to turn around. It was because of my own physiology. I was getting a cough, and my lungs I was getting pulmonary edema, so I had to turn around. But when I was up there, at that turning point, I wasn't looking at the peak as being the goal. I was looking to push myself as hard as I could, and when it was time to turn around, the thing that I kept visualizing was my wife and kids, right? So, I kept seeing Lisa and Liam and Ruth and just pictures of them, and it made the decision to turn around really a lot easier because, it makes you realize how, like, when you're that close, but, it's too risky. You realize what you could lose, and you just think to yourself, it's not something that you're willing to do. So, I made it. I'm proud of my accomplishment and how far I went. I mean, that was just about 21,000 feet is where I had to turn around, and but yeah, just thinking of Lisa and the kids, and that's what helped me turn.
So out of the 7 summits, how many are under where you ended up?
5.
Okay.
So Everest is the only one higher than this for the continental summits. Yeah.
So at the point where you turned around, you could have summited on the other 5.
Oh yeah, for sure, by far, because the point that I turned around was about 1 kilometer higher than Kilimanjaro.
Wow.
For example, yeah.
I was just trying to put some perspective on it, right? For us normal people who haven't done that.
So when you think about it, when we're that high, the extra 300 meters, I don't think would have changed the view a whole lot.
Yes.
And the curvature, like you can start seeing the curvature of the Earth when you're
so
up
it's
that
not
high.
flat?
It's not flat.
Oh,
I hate to
man.
tell you that. Although maybe you'll have to go up and check for yourself if you want.
The view at that point, like, is it clear, or are you looking down at clouds? Like,
Yeah,
what's
definitely.
it like? It's
Oh,
unreal.
you're looking down at clouds, you know, it's very clear because the atmosphere is so thin. Everything is so very blue there. It's incredible, and the sun is so incredibly intense there too. It's the UV exposure there is about 17 times what it is here, like
Wow.
at sea level. So the UV light just it scorches. So you can burn very very easy. So you
Minus
can burn
20 in
very,
the sunburn, right?
yeah, it's so I was so careful. Like even the sunglasses that you wear, they have to be they're mountaineering glasses, and they're very dark. They're dark enough that you couldn't drive around town wearing these glasses here. They're just so dark, and you have to cover up, and you've got suntan like sunscreen on constantly, and you know it's a big risk actually is getting sunburn there because once your skin is burnt, it doesn't respond properly to the cold as well. So you get sunburnt, and then you get frostbite, and then you know that's one of the big problems there is people will like lose, you know, bits of their ears and nose, or get severe like frostbite in their fingers and things like that. That turns a lot of people around because this is you know at the peak. Through the nights, it gets to be about minus, you know, 25 degrees Celsius or so.
And with the wind, it doesn't take much to drop that to 40.
It's very windy too. So we have to when we make up camp, you use rocks as windbreaks for a lot of places, and you try to all the camps are strategically located, not necessarily just to be sheltered, but to be out of the way of like rock slides and things like this, because it's so cold at night, everything freezes. And then as the sun comes up, that intense sun warms everything up and everything thaws. So there's, you know, I would have thought that the mountain had more permanence than what it did, but it was always kind of shifting, and it was always kind of like, you could hear rock slides at night, you know, that sort of thing. It was, so the campsites are the safest spots to be.
So rock slides, one thing. What about wildlife?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of wildlife that high. There's some of these giant kind of foxes. There's llamas and things like this. But there's not a lot of wildlife, and not a lot of because there's not a lot of vegetation. Like as soon as you get over 3,500 meters, the vegetation starts to disappear. Yeah. So it's like a desert kind of.
How did you, I guess I can use the word, decompress from an experience like that? I mean, you've climbed a mountain, you've gone through all of that. You're back home. You know, obviously you're going to be on a natural high. You're, you know, like you said, proud of yourself, very proud of yourself. So did you find there was a process to kind of decompress and kind of get back to reality, if I can use that term?
I actually had to take it a little bit easy because the reason why I departed the mountain was because of pulmonary edema. So I had a bit of a cough for quite a while. I felt I was like very low energy for probably a couple of weeks afterward. And actually, when I looked at photos, I didn't even really want to look at photos when I first started because I felt so unwell for so long that even looking at mountains made me kind of viscerally not feel well. Like I felt nauseous looking at, like in our bathroom we have a painting of a mountainscape, and I'd have to like not look at it because I just felt like this aversion. I actually felt sick. So you know, coming down off of that, it was more like recovery, as opposed to like coming off of some elation or some high. So it was more just trying to like get my weight back up and things like this, and just try to like, it was probably about a month before I started feeling like normal again, I would say. You know, I stopped exercising afterward and just tried to kind of build my strength up.
Any lasting effects other than a few gray hairs? Maybe?
Yeah. Well, one of the lasting effects, I think, like at the time, people said, "Would you do it again?" And I would say, like, emphatically, no. Right. But now, at this point, in hindsight, looking at it, I'm starting to feel drawn to it again, and The only thing I can think of is like maybe it's what it's like after, maybe after pregnancy, how a woman would say, no, I never want to do that again. And then it's not too long after, and you're starting to think, geez, maybe I could do that again. It'd be great. So maybe the lasting effect is like I've got a taste for this now where I didn't necessarily think I did before. So I'd like to try to. I don't necessarily think I want to do this mountain again.
You don't feel drawn to the fact that I got to make that last 300 meters.
No, I don't. I mean, that might change in perspective, but for the amount of time and effort and work and planning and training, I'd love to maybe. There's lots of mountains, right? And I'd like to maybe see another peak.
What about your friend Paul? Is he feel the same?
Absolutely. His hasn't diminished at all. He's got 2 of the 7 summits down, and he wants to do another one. So the next one that he's been putting a bug in my ear is a mountain called Mount Vincent in Antarctica. So that one's only 5,000 meters. So
that sounds like an adventure all in itself.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's the one that I got to try to sell to my wife and family here in a couple of years'
There's
time.
lots of wonderful cruises that go around Antarctica. You just sort of,
Yeah, that's what I'll tell her. You can maybe I said binoculars and you could see me there, right? So from shore.
Well, one thing about going to Antarctica is that you can be darn sure it's cold.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
don't got to worry about it being -20, -10, or whatever.
It stays cold.
Yes.
That's the thing. Yeah, it stays cold.
Did you keep a journal?
So actually, I didn't keep much of a journal, and I mostly just through photographs. And then when I look at those photographs, it recalls for me. I mean, the way that we take pictures now, you can almost like create memories out of those photos. So yeah, except
How old
for
are your kids?
My son is 13 and my daughter's 10. Yeah.
It might be worth it just to kind of sit down with the photos and just kind of document it.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking ahead, from my own situation and my grandparents that had no stories to tell, right? That there's a point where it's nice to have that sort of legacy.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as like something I'd like to do because I just want them to know that, they can do hard things too,
Yeah, what was going through your mind at the time, that kind of thing. It's great insight.
Todd, do you think what you accomplished is going to inspire other people, maybe not to necessarily to climb a mountain, but to look at what you did and say, gee, if Todd can do something like this, maybe I should try something, maybe on a smaller scale.
Yeah, definitely. So being a scout leader is it's a great way to connect with kids, and I gave them kind of a slideshow presentation and a talk, and the kids, they're between 10 and 13, and sometimes it's hard to keep their attention. But when I went through the slideshow and presentation with them, they just they were silent for pretty much 45 minutes, just in awe, and afterward the questions that they would ask, and it was really neat to see, because I think they saw that as I know this guy, this is just Scouter Todd, right? And and he did that, so I think that letting people know that or youth know that sticking with a plan, a program, seeing it through, following it through, doing difficult things can be important in showing that you can do difficult things through your personal life too. Like things may seem big, and they are, and you can find a way and chip away and work at them and get there. So I think that's true too with what I do in physiotherapy. I mean, some of the things that I was experiencing on the mountain, like low oxygen and just the extreme fatigue. I mean, that's what some of my patients go through, every day, right? So, it's important to do these things, to have these experiences, and just keep opening your world up. Don't let your world close down in on you. That's.
If you had any words of advice for somebody thinking about climbing a mountain for the first time, other than maybe find new friends, what would you impart?
Advice for someone who is, climbing for the first time. I would say, you have to look at it as probably a 6-month preparation, right? And look at the preparation as being part of the experience, because all the time that you're doing and preparing, you're conditioning yourself, and I didn't make the summit, right? And when I came back, I thought, how am I going to tell people that I didn't make it, that I was 300 meters from the top and I didn't make it to the top? But I would also say too, like, if you're always reaching your goals, you're probably not necessarily setting them high enough, right? It's okay not to succeed, because the process you did in getting to that point is the process that's built you stronger.
Todd, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your story. I mean, it's fascinating, inspirational. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Gary.
I'm Gary Nickerson,
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
and this has been Outside My Window.